Welcome back. Earlier this year in one of my videos where I was talking about upcoming titles that I was especially looking forward to and titles that I was going to pre-order, I talked about Woody Shaw's Blackstone Legacy, and guess what? Just recently I got my copy in. So this is in the Craft Recordings Jazz Dispensary series, and I was very excited to get this one in, mostly because I've never owned a copy in any format. So very excited to have one in. This may indeed be the most exciting Jazz Dispensary release since perhaps The Elements by Joe Henderson, which came out some time ago. This is another really good one in that series. Really like that series. I don't get every single title, but I always take a look and see what they're putting out. So that's the topic for the video. I don't have an original pressing, so we can't do a comparison. I'm just going to talk a little bit about this album and why I like it. So before we dive in, as always, hit subscribe, hit the notification bell, and follow me on Instagram at what_can_brown. First things first, who is Woody Shaw, or really who was Woody Shaw? Unfortunately, he had a short career. He died early. So Woody Shaw was a trumpet player, and actually at the time of Blackstone Legacy, he was only 27 years old. This is his first recording as a leader, but he had a number of recordings actually for other leaders on other labels, dating back I think to around 1963 when he was playing with Eric Dolphy in Paris. So he sort of got his, I would say, his recording career launched with Eric Dolphy, as well as Jeff Gilson, Nathan Davis, right, all playing in Europe in around the mid 60s, like 63 to 65 or so, and he's featured on some of those recordings that were put out. Really recommend all of them. So I think one of his breaks was joining Horace Silver for the Cape Verdean Blues. That was for Blue Note, and that sort of got him introduced to the Blue Note label, and then resulted in really a couple of things. One is that there are some early Woody Shaw demo tapes that were made for Blue Note that weren't released at the time. They were released actually much later, I think in the early 80s. You can find those. You can Google it. I forget the label that put them out, but they essentially dug up those demo tapes and released them. But Shaw also played on Larry Young's Unity. He played on Horace Silver's The Jody Grind. A number of other sessions for musicians like Joe Henderson, Gary Bartz, Jackie McLean, including on Demon's Dance, which is coming out on Tone Poet pretty soon. He played on a Pharoah Sanders session, all before releasing Blackstone Legacy, which was recorded in 1970 and I believe released at the very beginning of 1971. So the lineup here includes some musicians that he had already played with on some of those other albums, but you've got Gary Bartz, you've got Benny Maupin, George Cables, Ron Carter, Clint Houston, and Lenny White. This album only has 6 tracks on it, and it is a double disc album. So how might that be? Well, it's because the shortest track is just 9 minutes, and the longest clocks in at 18.5 minutes. So this is longer format stuff. So this was originally put out by Contemporary Records, and around the same time, Contemporary wasn't doing, I would say, that much that was interesting, and I think it was a little bit of a pivot point, because around that time, 1970, 1971, Contemporary was releasing mostly like reissued sessions by Art Pepper, by Barney Kessel, but at the same time, they were putting out newer and more progressive things by musicians like Sonny Simmons and Prince Lasha. And it felt like this time period was a little bit of the last gasp for Contemporary Records until the later 70s, when they started featuring really Chico Freeman, I think, was kind of the most exciting musician who came about in that later 70s, like 76, 77, 78 kind of time period for Contemporary Records. So anyway, it was kind of just an interesting time, I think, for Contemporary. So anyway, with Craft Recordings really owning the Contemporary catalog, and really Concord, right, owning the Contemporary catalog, and obviously you've seen some of their Contemporary releases they've been putting out in partnership with Acoustic Sounds. Well, for this one, they decided to tackle it through the Jazz Dispensary series, as previously mentioned. And so this is generally. Actually, I think that this specific series is called like the Jazz Dispensary Top Shelf series. So that Joe Henderson that I showed you was also in that series. So a few details about this pressing. It is 180 gram. It is remastered from the original tapes by Kevin Gray, manufactured at RTI, and it does have this very nice gatefold tip-on jacket. If anything, and I don't know, maybe it's because there's multiple discs and so it feels especially heavy, but the cover construction just feels even better than normal on this thing. It is just like super thick, hard material, and it just feels really nice. And I believe that they just reproduced exactly what this would have looked like in its original form in terms of having the liner notes in the middle and having this design on the back. Could be wrong. Like I said, I do not have an original pressing of this. You may ask, what is the music? What can I expect with this album, especially if you're somebody who hasn't heard it, because it's been hard to find a copy of this in any format, especially that original, simply because it's so desirable. So what is the music? I would describe it, some people don't like these genres and subgenres in terms of labeling music, but as a point of reference, what I would say is that it's very much post-bop. There is some spiritual jazz elements to it. There are even some jazz fusion elements to it. Probably the best way that I would describe it, at least at a high level. This is not at all what Miles Davis was doing at this time. So think 1970, 1971, your mind is immediately going to go to that electric period, right, for Miles Davis, which is a sort of a post-Bitches Brew. I would say that the sound here is not only much better, has much better clarity than a lot of that kind of distorted stuff that Miles was doing. It's a lot more analog sound here as well. And I say that despite the fact that that there's an electric piano that's featured prominently, really across the entire album. And I think that maybe is the only sort of cue that the electric sort of direction was even happening, right? That Miles and others were kind of experimenting with that kind of electric and sort of distorted sound. I already talked about the lineup, and I wanted to talk about the soundstage in terms of how the instruments are sort of organized. What I noticed is that there's a bit of a harder separation, I would say, between the instruments than what I expected. And it's not really a problem, I just kind of noticed it, especially in certain places. So anyway, what you have is you have drums and bass in right, you have electric piano in left, Woody Shaw is definitely in the center, and the reeds are split. So Gary Bartz is in the left channel, Benny Maupin is the right. And actually the two musicians play, I would say, somewhat with different styles. I think Gary Bartz wasn't quite as out with his playing as he would eventually get, and I thought that Benny Maupin was surprisingly out on this album. And I don't know, maybe that's unfair. I know that these are musicians who could play in a variety of styles. I just found that Gary Bartz took more of a sort of lyrical approach to his playing on this album than maybe what I expected. So the other thing, and I know I mentioned Miles Davis, I actually hear some similarities with what Lee Morgan was doing at this exact same time, especially with his Live at the Lighthouse, I'll say series. It was a release, right? But then we got the 12 disc or whatever that was box set. But I found some similarities in terms of the style and sort of themes that were being explored. And funnily enough, actually, Benny Maupin plays on both of those recordings. So I think that's, maybe that's part of it. Maybe that's part of the reason why, but also because you have that trumpet as the leader kind of thing across these two albums. I'm quite sure that Woody Shaw was aware of that release because it came out, actually, now I'm wondering if they came out around the same time, but in any event, Lee Morgan had been touring, playing that kind of music for a little bit. So I'm sure that Woody Shaw was aware of it. I'm sure that he was at least somewhat advised by Lee Morgan and others who came before him, right? So as far as the style of music that's being played, in addition to kind of some of those genres that I referenced earlier, there's a lot of simultaneous improvisation on this album. And so I think you kind of have to prepare yourself for something that's a little bit more, hectic perhaps than something that's very much structured. White's rhythms are sort of, kind of these like swirling, pulsing kind of drum work that he plays that's common on a lot of post-bop as well as spiritual jazz. Some of the musicians, especially saxes, but even Woody Shaw's trumpet, are kind of shrieking at times. And it's hard to describe this recording. I think as a result, it's hard to describe this recording as, say, something that is, has excellent sonic detail. And I think instead where this music wows you is really just in the power of, the music. Like, I don't think that it's necessarily, you're going to focus in on the recording and sort of the recording execution as much as you are going to be focused on the ideas that these musicians have as they express themselves through improvisation. I would say that the feel of the music is very kind of emotional, and very much a reaction to what was happening at the time, again, 1970, 1971, both in terms of, I think, the Black experience in America as well as the Vietnam War. And that's actually not my assessment. I was not alive during that time and don't have that experience. But those are some of the words that I believe that Woody Shaw provided actually in the liner notes for this album that kind of gives us some perspective. So yeah, I mean, if I'm going to say the highlight, I suppose, I mean, I said it is the power of the music, but maybe if I can kind of expand on that, I think the highlight is the group dynamic, sort of the collaborative nature, I think, of expansive, longer format improvisation. I think really is the highlight, as well as the emotion, right, that these musicians use as they're playing across, well, four sides of music. George Cable's playing here may be the best that I think he's ever been captured. He just sounds really, really good playing this kind of electric piano that almost offsets the louder, kind of, again, shrieking, more analog sound of some of the horns, and I really like that. Woody Shaw and Benny Maupin may be playing some of the most out that I've heard them play. Lenny White's percussion here is really nice. It's complex. It's really I think it's really important with having his drum work as well as the combination of electric bass and acoustic bass. I just think adds this really, really nice dynamic. Perhaps with some of the best sonic detail. If you're going to talk about sonic detail in terms of this album, some of the best may actually be executed by Ron Carter, who is on upright acoustic bass here. And actually maybe one specific area to point you to is towards the end of that opening track, which also happens to be the title track, so Blackstone Legacy. Takes up all of side one because it's like 16 minutes. I think that that there is a lot of nice character to Ron Carter's bass there, but really throughout the entire album, I just think that he has a solo there that where he's particularly pronounced in the mix, and he just sounds fantastic. And actually, I might say that his solo there is perhaps some of the best that I've heard Ron Carter play as well. All right, so because I don't have that original pressing, I can't, I can't say that this is the same or better than any other pressing. I've never heard any other pressing. I've only heard it digitally. What I can say is that I recommend this album. It sounds really good. No complaints. I think Kraft and sort of Jazz Dispensary did an excellent job with the entire package. Right, the vinyl sounds great. I told you the jacket's amazing. It's I just think it's the complete package, and I think for anybody who likes this style of music, I think this is an easy one to consider picking up, because I think that I think you're going to really like it. So I would recommend previewing it and then deciding whether you want to pull the trigger. So very excited that I finally got this in. And all that sort of excitement and energy I had for this several months ago when it was announced. Now that it's been delivered, I can say that it delivered on my expectation. So very excited to have this one. So bit of an abbreviated discussion today about this record. Hopefully for some folks who don't like sticking with me for 20 and 30-minute videos, hopefully this is a little bit more digestible. I guess that's it for now. So thanks again, and I'll see you next time.